Continued attacks on the Trump administration are seemingly just continuing at the same pace. The government has been shut down now for about 5 days, and peace talks around the world are just not really going that well. We have a little bit to talk about the government shutdown, about Israeli and Hamas peace talks, as well as a couple of other little interesting bits surrounding the Israel situation. We're going to talk about that. We got a couple of bites to talk about. And yeah, with that, let's get right into the show. My name is Sal Sante. This is the We the Patriots podcast. Let's get right into it. So I was out last week. I was actually moving, so didn't feel like putting up a show. Had a lot of stuff to deal with. Still am dealing with quite a bit, but we'll keep that aside for now. I appreciate all the help that I got from all you out there, and a huge thank you to my girl Bree. You're amazing, and you have been extremely helpful in all of this. Yeah, this has been awesome. Now, back to the show. I want to play you guys a clip from what's been going on surrounding Israel and Netanyahu and all of this hoopla, for lack of a better word. Here we go.
Something I would like to raise, which was actually my first published paper, was how you and the Likud party are cut from the same ideological cloth as Trump and the GOP in America. And so specifically with Charlie Kirk's assassination, who was a big mentor of mine, who's my first mentor in the space, evangelicals, from all my research, evangelicals are the reason that Israel has been supported in public sphere outside of just Jews. So with Charlie's assassination and with the kind of trajectory that we see with like Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, I guess I'm curious about what's another game plan if we lose evangelical support for the state of Israel. What's our backup plan to be strong, like outside of the diaspora?
Christian influencers. Okay, you said we talked about the woke right, and you said I call it the woke Reich. That's a brilliant observation. The woke Reich, because these people, they're not any different from the woke left. I mean, they're insane. They're loonies. But they're actually meeting on some of the things. And what we have to do is we have to secure that part of the base of our support in the United States. That is being challenged systematically. A lot of this is done with money. Money of NGOs, vast. Money of governments, vaster. Okay? We have to fight back. How do we fight back? Our influencers. I think you should also talk to them if you have a chance. To that community, they're very important. And secondly, we're going to have to use the tools of battle. The weapons change over time. You can't fight today with swords. That doesn't work very well. Okay? And you can't fight with cavalry. That doesn't work very well. And you have these new things, like drones, things like that. I won't get into that. But we have to fight with the weapons that apply to the battlefields in which we're engaged. And the most important ones are the social media. And the most important purchase that is going on right now is class
Followers.
TikTok. TikTok, number one. And I hope it goes through because it can be consequential. And the other one, what's the other one that's most important? X. Exactly. Very good. And, so we have to talk to Elon. He's not an enemy. He's a friend. We should talk to him. Now, if we can get those two things, we get a lot. And I could go on other things, but that's not the point right now. We have to fight the fight, okay? To give direction to the Jewish people and give direction to our non-Jewish friends or those who could be our friends. Are we going to succeed with everyone? No. Will there be a strong counterpart? Yeah.
Okay, so with that clip, I don't really have much to say about it other than the fact that it's bizarre that a foreign leader is coming to U.S. soil, saying these type of things to people that actually have an influence, and the fact that this is even possible. This is the type of stuff, I believe it was Dave Smith who originally said this, so I'm not trying to act like I am coming up with this idea originally, but this is a thought that I think a lot of people have, and that's the fact that this is the type of stuff that you would expect to be in a closed doors meeting that people are making up, and you're like, no, there's no way Netanyahu said that. You're just making things up. You're going too far. No, he's on a hot camera, a hot mic, and is saying this stuff blatantly out in the open, and it's just absurd to think about. Using terms like weapons of war and counting TikTok as one of them, which we'll get into in a couple of minutes. Using stuff like that, talking about how we have to attack ways of thinking and pretty outrightly saying that your competitors in the geopolitical field that are disagreeing with your carrying out of this war as Nazis. Well, it's language that we've become pretty accustomed to here in America, and it's disturbing. And it's disturbing that the Trump administration is not taking really any action against who's supposed to be our greatest ally in terms of their undermining what is supposed to be the freedom of speech here in America. And we outlined that in the last episode. So if you have any questions on what that means and all the Jimmy Kimmel stuff that now, just so you know, he is back on the air, all that crap, covered it last episode. Really, this episode is more about what Israel is doing and, of course, what's going on in our government. We'll get to the government shutdown in the second half of the show here, but the TikTok thing is really bizarre to me. As I'm sure most of, if not all of you know, I am not a user of TikTok. I don't like TikTok. I never liked the platform, regardless of who owned it. And that being said, it is a massive purveyor of news and information around the world, and especially in America. It's one of the highest used, maybe the highest used social media platforms that there is here in the country. There was these holdups because it was owned by a Chinese company. I believe it was owned by ByteDance. So there was all these issues. There was bans of TikTok. I think it was earlier this year, there was a ban of TikTok, and then it was lifted by Trump and it was saved by Trump and all this crap. But basically what ended up happening was that Trump and the administration forced the sale to the owner of Oracle, I believe. Let me just pull that up and make sure that I'm correct. Yes. So the owner of Oracle, Larry Ellison, did in fact purchase TikTok. Now, I won't say forced. This sale has now allowed a lot of different kinds of censorship to occur on the platform. And again, I'm not a user, so I'm going based on a lot of stories. But from what I'm hearing, there is multiple accounts of anti-Israel or anti-Israeli government sentiment being censored on TikTok. Basically not allowed to talk about the negative of what's going on in Gaza right now. Not being able to talk about the just disgusting things coming out of Netanyahu's government or coming out from his words. All this stuff is getting censored, and it is really kind of goes against the grain of the narrative that we do not want to have foreign-owned TikTok, and yet we're totally fine with one ideology being promoted over the other, and that is an Israeli-centered ideology running TikTok rather than a Chinese one. Now, that being said, I don't support either. I'm just trying to point out that there is I think there's a pretty obvious hypocrisy that's involved in not only the sale of this, but what is now being done on behalf of TikTok and how they are censoring different information. Being against a government, and I've said this many times and I'll continue to say this, being against the government of Israel is not anti-Semitic. I will never get off of that hill. I will die on that hill. Every government is able to be criticized. And part of living in America and the great thing of being in America is you have the ability to criticize your own government. But that being said, we seem to have a lot more, we as the governing populace, so I'm not containing myself in that, given I have no play in the government of America or a state or anything. But our politicians seem to have a lot more offense taken to criticism of Israel than even of our own government. And that is blasphemous. We are allowed to criticize anybody that we want, as long as it doesn't get to the level of libel or threats to that individual organization. You're allowed to criticize anybody, and especially a foreign government, whether it be China, Japan, Germany, Russia, or Israel. There should be no issues with that, and yet we see more and more laws coming on the books, whether you're talking about anti-Semitic speech laws or what's going on with TikTok. We've had this argument many, many times over, really it revolves around the section 230, I believe it is, that it says that if you are an online platform, you cannot be sued by anybody for what people post on your platform, and that's fine. That being said, that shouldn't give you the right to censor Americans or censor users in general for what they're saying, even if it is critical of something that is anti the government that you're trying to uphold. The whole point of having free speech is that ability to criticize the government. It's really not to be mean to your neighbor. It's really not to say things that are outlandish. What the codification of free speech was all about is that you have the ability to criticize your government. We're losing that right, being unable to criticize the United States and its relationship with Israel, being able to criticize our funding of the war here in Gaza or our funding of the war in Ukraine. This is what it's all about. This is what is at the highest of priorities in the ability of us, we the citizens, to be able to criticize. And seeing more and more attacks on that is frustrating. And it's also getting at the core of what free speech was meant to be. Yeah, and it's just getting to the furthest point of frustration for someone like me who I've been utterly disappointed. I've said from the beginning, from October 8th, I put out a piece, and I just don't remember if this is up or not, so I apologize if it's not on the feed, but it's out there somewhere. And that's the fact that my original hope after October 7th was that we would not see an overreaction by Israel, and that, they have the right to defend themselves 100%, and they would go do what they had to do in order to not allow this to happen again. And they've actually gone so far away from what I was hoping that I've lost any support that I originally had for the state of Israel. Again, this has nothing to do with the Israeli people, has nothing to do with Jewish people in general. This has to do with the Israeli government and the way that they have gone about this response to an attack. I'm at a loss. And so where that brings us today is that we have another peace deal on the table. This is going in front of Israel. Israel has allegedly already agreed, and now it's up to Hamas. If you have not seen this, I highly recommend you go and actually just read through it yourself, because I don't have all the points in front of me. I'm not claiming to be an expert on this, but I will tell you what I do know. Apparently, this is a 20-point plan that has been put forth by President Trump. A lot of it was made with the help of Israel, or with Israel's critiques first, before actually putting it out and having it accepted. So you have to keep that in mind. Basically, what it's saying is that the deal is Hamas has to release the hostages, Hamas has to disarm itself, and has to allow Israel to come in. And at that point, Israel will be asked to do the same, to give up hostages, and then to discontinue this war, this attack. How I'm seeing it is that it is an impossible ask of Hamas. That being said, I hope that it gets accepted, because this war needs to end. That being said, there have been many attempts at a ceasefire, many attempts at trying to contain this outbreak of violence that have failed. Whether you're talking about earlier in the year, the ceasefires that were put forth and Israel, then Hamas, broke them. Whether you're talking about what happened with Iran, I know that's a separate issue, but I think it all kind of helps in pointing out the narrative that these peace deals are not abided by. Yeah, a lot of this really seems like a bad deal for Hamas, and I will explain why. Number one is that the hostages, and I'm not claiming that this is a good idea for either side. Obviously, both sides have plenty of hostages taken. But the hostages that are held by Hamas are the leverage. They are the reason that you would expect that, say, Israel doesn't full-on bomb the entirety of the Gaza Strip. You would also expect that, for this reason, holding on to these hostages gives them a bargaining chip in peace deal negotiations. Letting go of those hostages without any promise that Israel is to do the same yet, as that is stage one of the deal as I understand it, well, that just doesn't really make sense in terms of if you were Hamas, if you were trying to come out of this alive. Now, so that's step one. Step two is that they need to disarm. And this is all before Israel actually does anything. Hamas needs to disarm themselves. That makes no sense. And again, I'm not trying to say what Hamas did on October 7th or here on out. I'm not trying to say that that's right. I'm trying to understand from a perspective of actually achieving a peace deal that lasts and makes sense for both sides. I can't see them accepting this. Why would you disarm yourselves? I mean, they are, at the end of the day, basically the only governing body, even though they are a massive death cult and a bunch of terrorists. They are the governing body of the Gaza Strip, or at least that's how they see it. Giving up their weapons gives up whatever sovereignty they do have, and they are not a state. So we all need to keep that in mind at the end of the day. Hamas can't accept those conditions. Again, nothing will be done by Israel in terms of releasing hostages or discontinuing their attacks. Not like they're giving up their guns. That's not even part of this deal. But just for argument's sake, nothing is going to be done by Israel on either of those fronts until both of these things happen by Hamas. Now, allegedly, part of the deal is that amnesty would be given to Hamas members. You have to assume that that would be an allowance of relocation, I guess, because if Israel was honest about wanting to keep their people safe, there's no way they allow Hamas to willingly live right next to them and believing that they are disarmed. I mean, one of the biggest arguments you hear from Israelis and Israeli government officials is that Hamas always lies. So you can't imagine that Israel would accept a deal that's saying that, oh, we're going to give amnesty and not going to criminally prosecute Hamas members if they are disarmed because, well, they always lie according to the Israeli officials. And again, I'm not really disagreeing with that, but my whole point in saying all of this is that this deal doesn't make any sense to accept from Hamas's standpoint. Number one, Israel has violated almost every ceasefire agreement that has happened in the past 25 years, maybe even going back further. Number two, being that they have no leverage. Everything that's being sold to them is on a contingency that they being Hamas, will follow through on all of these steps to demilitarize, give back hostages, return to peacetime. Israel doesn't have to do anything until they're satisfied. Excuse me. That to me seems like what we call a poison pill. A poison pill in a negotiation being something that is put in the bill or in the negotiation in order to force a decline from one of the parties. And that's just how I'm seeing it. So at the end of the day, yes, there's a peace deal that is allegedly on the table. I do not think it will go through. However, as shitty as the deal is from me just looking at it from a third-party perspective, as shitty as it looks, I really hope that it gets accepted. I really think that having a continued war, this is by far the longest live conflict that Israel has had in its existence. It needs to end. It's not good for world peace. It is not good for peace in the Middle East region. And that being said, I just do not think that this is going to be accepted. I think many more lives are going to be lost before there is a peace achieved. We will have to wait and see, and I would be very happy to be wrong. I just don't think it's going to happen. So with all of that said, another interesting bit that came out of the Middle East, Israel part of the world over the past, I guess this is probably within the last couple of weeks, is that we had the flotilla activists. So I'm not going to stay on this too long, but as a part of that flotilla activists was Greta Thunberg, our very favorite activist around the world. If you can't sense my sarcasm in saying that, I apologize for being too blunt. Yeah, she is terrible. Some of the things that she advocates, especially around the climate, are just asinine. Either they are counterproductive or they just don't make sense whatsoever logistically, and that's okay. You're allowed to be a protester. You're allowed to do all this stuff, get arrested for staging and for promoting your cause, as she's done multiple times at this point. That's fine. What Israel has done with her is that they have detained her, and there are reports. Now, I will take these with the smallest grain of salt possible, but there are reports, and these are reports quoting from other activists that were a part of this flotilla, that she was abused, dragged by her hair, beat up, forced to sit in a bed that had bed bugs, all this stuff. Basically, my whole point in saying this is, number one, take that with a huge grain of salt. I'm not necessarily going to believe just anybody who's saying that. That being said, I wouldn't put it past Israel to try to demean these people and treat them poorly, as they do not want this to continue. However, what this flotilla's objective was to get aid that was not being allowed to flow in from Israel into Gaza. And I think that one of the worst things that Israel could do is what they have done, and that is by arresting, detaining these people and putting them through harsh treatment. Getting more and more, as they have over the past year and a half, 2 years, getting more and more negative press is the last thing that I think Israel needs in terms of trying to get the good faith of the rest of the nations around the world. So what they've done with this flotilla activist group, I think is negative. It's going to shine a negative light on them again. Not that they're really trying to put positive light, it seems, on themselves. And especially if you look back on that video, just how disturbing it was about 10-15 minutes ago. A whole lot of not great things coming out of the Israeli part of the world right now. Well, I will just end this segment on this. I would hope that Trump comes in with a heavier hand, that he is willing to go further lengths than any American president has been willing to do in terms of pushing that this relationship, this continued relationship between America and Israel, that this is not a forever thing, especially if Israel continues to act against the best interest of not only the world, but more specifically the United States. So we will see where it ends up. I think the biggest thing to pay attention to is this peace deal. If it goes through, as much as I think it's poison pilled and I think it's got issues, I think that it would be 10 times better than what we're dealing with right now, which is this ongoing war, this continued destruction in Gaza. Anything that is to avoid war, I am much more for than what we are seeing. So we will see. I do not think it's going to go through, but let's see. Let's wait and see. And let's see if anything, any more news comes out, if there's any adjustments to this deal, what have you. We will see. Moving on to the more domestic side of things, and we will wrap the show up with this. I'm not going super long today. Again, I apologize for the wait, but we do have that big project on 9/11 that is in the works right now, and I'm very happy with how it's coming out so far. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on that than I am the regular shows until that's out. Now, getting into the domestic politics, what I think is the most important thing to talk about, of course, is the ongoing government shutdown. Now, as this releases tomorrow, as I'm recording this, as this releases, this situation may be totally changed. And I apologize for that, but I am recording this on Sunday when there is still an effective government shutdown. So first, I think it's really important to understand what a government shutdown is, because we talk about this yearly at this point. However, shutdowns are not a really old thing at the end of the day. Now, there's been plenty of times when funding was withheld or was talked about being withheld in order to achieve an objective or achieve some bipartisanship and deal making and whatnot. But government shutdowns realistically are something, a creation really of the 21st century, and more specifically actually only started in 2013. So as you remember, this was a very big thing under the Obama administration that the government was shutting down. I was very young when it happened, this 2013. That being said, I remember it very clearly because it was unfathomable that the government would shut down. Now, before I run through when those shutdowns all happened, I do want to discuss what it is a little bit more clearly, and that is the fact that all non-essential government functions stop. It is a lapse in funding, and it means that Congress and the Senate have not been able to come to agreement and vote through a spending bill that actually continues the budget and allows for the spending on the new fiscal year, which starts on October 1st. Now, non-essential services would include things like the National Park Service. Basically anything with travel is essential, anything with healthcare is essential. So a lot of things are actually not really affected. You see people saying that, the travel lines at the airport are extremely long, thanks Trump. That actually has nothing to do with the government shutdown. Those people are still being paid. That is not an issue. It's really more things like I said, the forest conservation, national parks, these function that are considered non-essential. What would not be affected are things like anything to do with the airlines, law enforcement, any of the big agencies like CIA, FBI, DNI, any of these other agencies are not affected. So keep that in mind, that government shutdown really at the end of the day only affects a small percentage of government workers. Anybody that comes off of being paid, they may be what's called furloughed, and in that case, they will have to perform their duties and get back pay because they're not currently getting paid. And that does happen. That is a lot of what you will hear in terms of people complaining about what's going on with the government shutdown. I haven't been paid in weeks. How do I support my family? Valid concerns. At the end of the day, what a government shutdown is, the best way that I can put it, is that the government has not been able to come to an agreement on how much they want to inflate our currency. How much do they want to screw us? That's really what it comes down to. The sad part is, and I think that it was Senator Ron Johnson, could be wrong on the name, I believe it's Senator Johnson, earlier in this year, who was advocating for a reduction in spending and not a massive cut, not like what Doge had set out to do earlier in the year before they really changed their goals and now don't really exist anymore. It wasn't massive slashes. It was attempting to revert back to pre-COVID levels of spending. So you're talking like fiscal year 2019 spending levels. And he got hit over the head for that. This isn't even happening. At the end of the day, what's not being agreed to by the two levels of the Congress, whether you're talking about Congress or the Senate, what's not being agreed to is actually basically a continuation of the Biden economic platform. Spending is going up a little bit and is not getting cut. Things that are getting cut are revolving around like Medicare, Medicaid, but there's no real cuts to anything like, military budget, social security, none of the things that are really sapping away at what our government continues to spend money on. We are really taking our budget and we are blowing it up still. So what this shutdown, what it is come down to is that, of course, it was Democrat and Republican pretty much split down the line. I think Thomas Massey might have been one of the only ones, Thomas Massey and maybe Rand Paul, the only ones on the Republican side that voted against it. When it comes down to it, this shutdown is just as performative as all of the rest of them. Like I mentioned, shutdowns go back to 2013. If you remember 2013, there was a 16-day shutdown from the 1st to the 17th. It was basically Republicans trying to delay the Affordable Care Act, knowing that they weren't going to be able to stop it. 2018, there was another shutdown, two of them actually. There was a 3-day shutdown from January 20th to the 22nd over immigration policy and the big DACA thing. And there was another shutdown, very brief, on February 9th, and that was on budget disagreements. 2019 was the longest one on record. That was 35 days from December 22nd. My birthday just so happens to January 25th. And well, that was actually 2018 to 2019. My apologies. And it was disputes over the border wall. So as we can see, and including the one in 2025, most of these shutdowns have happened under the Trump presidencies. That does not mean that the threat of shutdown has not loomed over every year since 2013, because that is the case. There have been threats of shutdown in order to achieve policy goals every single year. And what it's become is really a laughingstock, because at the end of the day, we can all see, anybody who's paying attention, that none of our politicians are fiscally responsible. None of them actually want to solve an issue. And many of them are playing political games in order to win points with either their voting base or the American people at large, maybe setting themselves up with a further run, whether it be for a governorship, whether it be for a Senate run, whether it be for a presidential run, whatever. And sometimes these people are running campaigns for their donors. They're getting paid to, filibuster, to stand in the way of votes in order to try to get policy for the people that are supporting them financially and their campaigns. In all of this, and basically my whole point in making this whole argument is that really us Americans should not be worried about a government shutdown, and it is not nearly as big of a deal as people are making it out to be. The one thing that I would love to see, that was a very minor story that I read on, I think it was like, it might have been on the Hill or something like that. I'm not exactly remembering it. But the big argument that was coming out of this shutdown was that President Trump was allegedly attempting to use this shutdown as an opportunity to cut federal employees. Now, using that as an excuse is unprecedented, apparently. That being said, one thing that we talked about previously about the president not using his powers that are given to him, or being stopped from using his powers that are given to him, is that he is supposed to have oversight over all of these agencies. They are all extensions of the executive branch of the United States, of the United States government, whether you're talking about the CIA, the FBI, the IRS, all of these, they're not parts of the Congress. They're not parts of the judiciary. They're all extensions of executive power. And the head of the executive is the president of the United States. And he is seemingly being confronted with a situation that I think everything on paper is pointing to a great opportunity to cut employees, save costs, maybe even cut departments. And it was a giant story that, well, I don't want to say giant because it's not lingering, but it was a big story that was put out that he is looking to use this as an opportunity. And I would be ecstatic if that was actually the case. It does not seem like he's following through on that. So just keep an eye on that. When it comes, again, to the government shutdown, it's not that big of a deal. The one thing that is upsetting, like one of the best uses of government money, in my opinion, is the National Park Service. If you have not gotten the opportunity to go see our national parks across the country, do so. It is phenomenal. Those people do great work. They conserve the environment. They really clean up after us all pigs in the United States. And it's a great thing that we do, conserving parts of our country not to be disturbed by either residential building or by factories or other commercial outlooks. And that is the one thing that is unfortunate. And the rest of it, really, at the end of the day, the rest of the non essential employees are really just that, non essential. And I'm just going to go out and end the show on this, that if you are a non essential employee, whether you work for the government or whether you work for a private company, if you're non essential, you should probably not have a job. I think at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. Really, that's my whole thoughts on the government shutdown. I don't care how long it lasts. If they keep fighting over spending money, I actually think that's great. Lower the freaking spending. Stop raising it. Stop trying to cram shit in and make it into a pork-filled bill again. I'm tired of this. And I think a lot of Americans are tired of it too. Let us live a life that is a little bit more lenient. We keep having to be frugal as Americans in order to survive. Maybe the government should too. I am your host, Sal Sante. This was the We the Patriots podcast. I'm very happy to be back with you all. Be on the lookout for next week's show and our big project, starting with episode 1 coming out in a couple weeks now. That's all I got for you. Hope you guys have a great week. Peace out.
I want to be something, not nothing. Trapped inside my dream and I'm running away from these demons. But the feeling's so good, I'ma keep dreaming.